The political situation really had me down the last couple of months, and this mural was one of the few little points of light that gave me a little bit of hope. And I actually kind of got worried when the warning disappeared, but then it came back and it got brighter and filled with far more bursts of color in all their diversity. But I was still feeling really down, struggling to add something to the conversation until the No King's Day protest, which was super motivational. 13 million people turned out for that event. And at over 3.5% of the U.S. population, that's a number that cannot be ignored. And I will always be proud to say that I was there. I'm here today to talk about cities, what they can do to resist hate, and maybe to prevent so much hate from forming in the first place. So we'll look at the hate that we're witnessing, the limits of political narrative, our emotional twins, love and hate, and this goes really deep into our biggest weakness as a species, how city design chooses which twin to feed, and as a bonus, comprehensive urban strategies to resist and prevent tyranny. Welcome to Edenicity, best practices for sustainably abundant cities. Here's what brought me down. I read this book with the almost unbelievable title, Unhumans, and yes, from the very first words in this book, the authors make clear that their intention is specifically to dehumanize everybody of a different political stripe than themselves. They call them deformed freaks, they accuse them of every crime under the sun, and they say it's the job of civilization to repel such repulsive people. Now, who are these repulsive people? Well, it's an amazingly big tent. It includes communists, French revolutionaries, and even civil rights marchers from the 1950s and 60s. And it would be easy to dismiss a book like this with its meandering, emotional, almost hysterical language, except for the fact that the Vice President of the United States endorsed the book in writing. Having an endorsement of something so hateful by somebody so powerful was bad enough, but it gets worse. I dug into the book The Dark Enlightenment by Nick Land and read a little by Curtis Yarvin, two Silicon Valley influencers who have helped to shape the thoughts and apparently behaviors of Elon Musk. According to The Dark Enlightenment, democracy quickly develops into a culture of systematic thievery. And if I were to summarize Yarvin and Land's thinking, it would be the following: that most people are idiots and that they should literally be property of the few truly smart people. Now, the way these guys write, they put these thoughts in very long quotations from other writers and in a very roundabout way voice their endorsement. So this is a distillation of really wordy, really indirect, and very difficult prose to quote. They also believe that democracy is short-sighted self-interest and that only CEOs and monarchs think long-term. Which makes perfect sense when you think about how long tobacco and oil companies manage to maintain their lies in public. And based on these assumptions, we should liquidate democracy, government, rule of law, academia, and media, placing them all under a CEO who quells protest with lethal force. It is no accident that Elon Musk wore a dark MAGA hat, referring obliquely to the Dark Enlightenment during the fall campaigns. Their goal is literally to rip apart all of the institutions of society and replace them with absolute dictatorship that recognizes no such thing as human rights. How could anybody support tearing the whole country apart? Well, there's no shortage of political narratives that might explain it. The fall of empire, class struggle, culture clash, ecological overshoot. And while I recognize the importance of clarifying the stakes and trying to motivate resistance and change, I think the result of these big narratives, as I read them today, is that there is a certain inevitability to them. After all, if the fall of empires always follows a certain pattern, then what can we actually do to change that pattern? A lot of these theories are thrown about by doomers, and they delight in nothing more than seeing the rest of us admit that they're right and that there is no way out and that we're all completely doomed. But to my mind, that renders these narratives useless. So let's look at this from the perspective of permaculture design. Permaculture is basically applied ecology, and as a twice-certified permaculturist, I'm trained to be as dispassionate as I can in looking at the basic forces at play in a situation and looking for opportunities to arrange elements in space and time to give us better outcomes. So what are the forces? Well, the biggest force right now is just how much hate there is. Why has it engulfed our political process? For example, the current administration claims that 21 million illegal immigrants arrived in the U.S. in the previous 4 years and wastes no time in labeling them as murderers and killers. But in this analysis from the Cato Institute, they, first of all, challenged that claim of 21 million, and then ask the question, if there were that many and they were as criminal as the current administration claims, then we should see an uptick in incarcerations of illegal immigrants. And it turns out that when you look at the actual incarceration figures, they're down almost 80% below the native-born rate, assuming 20 million illegal immigrants. So it cannot be true, both that there are that many and that they are that criminal. They're either way, way less criminal than the rest of us, or there's far, far fewer than is claimed. Now, I'm deliberately avoiding playing you the vitriol of this administration because I just can't stand to pollute these videos with it. But the old school view that you used to read in the self-help books by Dale Carnegie, among others, is that hate hurts the hater. That is, when somebody is being abusive in any way, that they are actually damaging their own psychology and health by being so hateful. This view has not stood the test of time very well at all. The new view over the past, about 20 years is that when you look into abusive relationships, it's usually the abuser rather than the victim who is in better health. And this is because it's the abuser who's getting constant hits of dopamine, which is a chemical that gives you a very strong sense of pleasure when you've achieved a goal. They get this little hit of dopamine because they've structured their world so that if someone else loses, they feel like they've won. This is the zero-sum game that leads to a poverty trap. Unfortunately, dopamine is not the only internal factor at play here. The sad truth is people often bond over hate. Again, I didn't want to play this, so you'll have to check the description below for the link, but I saw a video of a church cheering its preachers call to viciously harm outgroups. It is much more shocking than I'm going to describe here. The preacher is describing all these terrible things that he wanted to do to these outsiders that he's demonized, and his audience is cheering. Another case in point is a recent story, which I put in the links as well, of ICE breaking in and terrorizing an innocent mother and her daughters. And although these are overwhelmingly coming from one side of the political spectrum today, the thing that's very interesting to me is that nobody is completely immune to it. There's a lot of red state FAFO content. This would be fool around and find out content, where people are basically gloating that families that may have voted for the current administration are losing many of their public benefits and are likely to suffer as a result. And the thing that's really sad about this is that it's wishing harm on people's children, on innocent children. So what neurochemical could possibly be driving us to bond over hate? Well, it turns out it's actually a hormone called oxytocin. This is the love and social bonding hormone, and it occurs in healthy attachment. Now, I learned about it in my training as a foster parent, because sadly, when a child comes into foster care, it's almost always a very traumatic event. And the normal thing would be for them to be suspicious and not very cooperative. But sadly, you'll see why in a moment, many children who come into care are actually very compliant and very friendly at first and seem to be everybody's friend. And this, weirdly enough, is not good attachment, because the actual dynamic is that you cuddle with family, and when you're well attached, you shun strangers. And so a child who does not have secure attachment won't have that shunning behavior and will seem to get along really great at first. The problem comes down the road a bit when they become vulnerable to third parties who try to take advantage of them, and there's a whole host of other behaviors, running away and so forth. But the key to understanding attachment in a healthy family, you have this dynamic where you cuddle with family and you feel that more intensely when there's dangerous strangers that threaten. I can remember it vividly in many children that I've seen grow up, where they get to a certain stage of infancy where they begin to get very suspicious of strangers. And this is just built into all of us through our whole lives. The rest of our personality, the rest of how we interact with people is layered on top of this. And so this becomes a two-way street. You can actually increase your feelings of love for those that you're close to by thinking bad thoughts about strangers and people who are not in that in-group. So people, unfortunately, hate and harm outsiders sometimes to express and feel a bond to their in-group. This could be our greatest weakness as a species. After all, this is what demagogues use to divide us from each other, so they can use our own hate to conquer us and rule us. All right, what can we do about it? What's the cure? Well, as I've mentioned in recent episodes, cities have the ability to support three kinds of social capital. And the key to preventing hate and the rise of tyranny is to balance all three types of social capital. There's bonding social capital, which is what we've been talking about so far, where you feel close to a kin group of some sort, family or close friends. And this is really great for protection. You want that kind of social capital when there's emergencies. And you also want that kind of social capital if you're with a group that is trying to do really big things in a hurry. So this would be tech startups, among other things. The problem is that if that's all you've got among the three types of social capital, it doesn't scale very well. And oligarchs, unfortunately, arise in a condition where they get into smaller and smaller circles of very tightly bonded social capital. And that's when they start calling everybody else stupid. But the second kind of social capital is bridging social capital, where you have many weak ties. These are people that you see with some frequency, but they're not really your kin, they're not your family, you're not spending a lot of time in their lives, but you see them every week for shared activities of one sort or another. In my case, many years ago, I was on a sailing crew and got to know some of my fellow crewmates, one of whom worked for the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration. It turned out that he was involved in disaster recovery, and his specialty was actually recovering computer equipment that had been water damaged. This stuck in my mind a few months later when a hurricane came ripping through Hawaii and tore the roof off of a building where a family member worked. And this damaged something like $500,000 worth of computers. And they thought they were just going to have to get rid of them because there was so much water damage in these computers. But as soon as I heard about this, I said, hey, look, no, I've got this friend who works for the FAA. He's got this stuff you can spray in the computers and it will expel the water, and you can actually salvage most of your computers this way. And within maybe an hour or two, my family member had the goop and was able to save the computers. So my bridging social capital with my crewmate helped save the day. Bridging social capital is the social capital of innovation, connection, and opportunity. It's also the reason why Allentown, Pennsylvania is twice as prosperous as Youngstown, Ohio, and why Atlanta, Georgia is twice as prosperous as Birmingham, Alabama, as I discussed in episode 147. But there's a third kind of social capital that cities have available, and the most prosperous ones, like the ones I just mentioned, also use this to great effect. This is the infrastructure that connects people across social class. It includes top-quality public amenities such as transit, museums, parks, the post office, the weather service, the things that everybody, rich and poor, uses in a healthy city. So these are the types of social capital that should be in balance in cities, but unfortunately, cities not only sometimes fail to implement all three types of social capital, but cities can, believe it or not, be built for hate. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but I didn't know about redlining until I was well into my 50s. And if you're not familiar with the term, let me bring you up to date. Redlining is when the U.S. Federal Housing Administration made maps of lending risks in neighborhoods as part of their Housing Act of 1934 to kickstart the real estate industry and help get us out of the Depression. The red areas were considered to be high risk, and they were invariably minority or immigrant neighborhoods, primarily black families. Now, eventually, after decades of civil rights activism, redlining was outlawed by the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And as a result, nearly 2 generations of black families were locked out of the single biggest ticket to family wealth in all of U.S. history. Even today, the average black family has 1/10 of the average U.S. family's wealth. Now, I want to be clear. All humans have prejudice. Everybody has biases against one type or another. It's built into us from infancy, from our most basic human attachment. But it is a design error to build this bias into a city's physical structure. I think we know enough now to come up with a list of things that cities can do to be built for and against hate. Starting with social capital, cities that are built for hate are atomized, dividing people from each other, making it hard to form connections of any kind. And when they do form connections, these are strictly bonding social capital of the type that brings oligarchs together. Cities built against hate add bridging and linking social capital and do as much as they can to make it easy for people to bond with each other as well. Cities built for hate have zoning and housing policies that are racist, redlined, supersized, and exclusionary. Now, by exclusionary, I mean that they have policies that say that you can't build higher than a certain density. You can't build apartments or brownstones or townhouses or any other higher density development. And the theory behind this is that it keeps people of lower income out of the neighborhood. And these are still very common today. Cities built against hate encourage public, mixed income, transit-oriented design in every neighborhood. Cities like Vienna and most recently all of the bigger cities in France are starting to implement this policy to make up, in France's case, for decades of exclusionary zoning. And cities built against hate do everything they can to make their zoning and their housing inclusive and available to everybody, filling the gaps that naturally occur in the free market with well-built public housing as they do in Singapore, for example. Now, I know when people hear Singapore, they say, well, they're rich over there. Look, they didn't start rich. This policy was implemented specifically to improve their economic circumstances. And it did. Cities built for hate have school districts that are tiny, like the ones in Chicago, with lots of charter schools and vouchers that divide people from one another. Cities that are built against hate have a unified district that is well differentiated to serve children of many different needs within the district, and they are unionized. Now, this isn't just a random criterion. I have worked as a teacher in both charter schools and public schools, and I'm here to tell you that the level of professionalism and competency was orders of magnitude greater in the public school that I worked in, even though it was under much greater social stress because of the neighborhood that it was in. Cities built against hate make sure that the schools work for every student and they take good care of their teachers as well. Cities built for hate have transportation policies that are car dependent. Automotive transportation is absolutely lethal. It's responsible for over 90% of the trauma cases in the United States. But a car-based transportation system, where there are few, if any, other alternatives, like buses, trams, subways, or even bike lanes, make it very hard for low-income people to get around. Columbus, Ohio, has minimal public transportation, and as of a few years ago, it was one of the most difficult cities in the United States to climb out of poverty. Cities built against hate make heavy use of public transportation, which is inherently 60 times safer than cars in the case of buses, and 800 or more times safer in the case of rail that doesn't cross any car traffic. Cities built for hate have food deserts. You have huge neighborhoods where it's all liquor stores, pawn shops, and the like. Cities built against hate have urban gardens that supply local cafes in every neighborhood. Cities built for hate have health and education systems that are seen as a privilege for the few. Cities built against hate make health and education a universal right. Cities built for hate have law enforcement that profile people by skin tone. Cities built against hate have laws and procedures that recognize people's civil rights, due process, and restorative justice. And then finally, cities built for hate find themselves easily accommodating fascism for all the reasons listed above, whereas cities built against hate are already set up so that people have the bridging and linking social capital that makes it easy for all organizations to unite and resist the fascism. Now, if you want to help your city stand against hate, there are many other episodes on this channel that address that topic, but I'm also putting together a short course that pulls the key concepts of permaculture urbanism and permaculture urbanism, that is to say, Edenicity, together for anyone who wants to make their city and the planet more livable. I'm going to be offering this live on Thursday through Saturday, June 26th through 28th, 2025, from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Zoom. There will be about an hour of material plus about an hour of question and answer each of those 3 days. To find out more about the course, just see the link below in the description. That's the little 3 dots that says more below the video, and you'll find all the details there. Now, I know not everyone's going to be able to make it, so I will post the recordings for the patrons or as a standalone $200 course for anybody who's interested. Thank you so much to the patrons. I can't wait to see you in the course. And here are some of those related videos that I mentioned. Take care, stay green, see you next time.